Good evening, friends, and welcome, and thank you for being here. Pretty much on time this evening. That's amazing. I was doing a little bit of research because we're going to talk about a financial theory that was put into book form and later into movie form, and we're going to apply that to this time that we're discussing this evening. So, welcome to everybody. We are discussing Introduction to U.S. Politics or U.S. Government and Civics 101. This is the local high school civics book that we use here in the area. I don't know if they still use it. It's probably been replaced because this is 2009, 2010. But anyhow, this evening we're going to be talking about economic policy, and then we only have one more chapter to go after that. Now, I have arranged for the first Monday in July, we'll be interviewing Michelle Mitten, Michelle Mitten, Prepper veteran. There we go. She was a combat medic. We're going to be doing a little bit of talking about first aid and different things that happen in first aid, things you might want to consider adding to your first aid kit. I meant to get a video out today, and I've just been running ragged today. But I have everything set up. I'm going to do one on burns. The last video I did was on wound closure, and my physician gave me a compliment on that one. I had an appointment with him this morning. We were talking about it. He said, I really like the way you handled that. So he's in agreement with me. But anyhow, we're going to talk about burns in the next short. And then after that, we're going to talk about splinting broken bones. But anyhow, tonight we're talking about economic policy. And you know, you're going to see a lot of this stuff is still very current. A lot of the policies and procedures, we're at that point now as we transition into the 20th century, when the majority of economic policy was actually developed. That's going to have an effect on us in the 21st century. The one exception is the late 1800s is the Railway Labor Act, and that is still basically the act that is used for labor unions on railways and, believe it or not, airline industry. So the Railway Labor Act is the one that governs those two air carriers, ships and airplanes. Let's see who all's here. Good evening and welcome. I also want to do a video here in the very near future talking about we need to continue to have diverging questions that we ask ourselves. Because I belong to this one prepping group on Facebook, and I can't believe the number of people who are only preparing for one event, one time in that timeline for that event, and don't take into account other things. And, I was telling one guy today, October of 1962, when I started prepping, we were pretty convinced that it was going to be nuclear war by the end of the month. And I've been prepping for that nuclear war since 1962. So 62 years later, it looks like we may have it. Things don't happen on the timeline that we think they should as preppers. So don't invest everything into one event, one timeline, or don't even go bankrupt or in debt to the point where you can't take care of reality, real life. So I need to do a video about that. We need to exercise caution when we're doing this and be a little bit more realistic in what we do as well. So let's see who else here. Little Lone Prepper, welcome. Good evening. Great to see you. Utah Mike, welcome. Theoxerus, hello, welcome. Little Lone Prepper. And I already said that. Muskoka Oma, good evening. I hope that you have gotten in contact. I have got to quit using that mouse. Every time I touch it, it just closes the screen. I'm so sorry for that. Gosh, I'm afraid. How do I scroll up and down without it? No, let me see. Here we go. Let me see who else. Diana 2, welcome. Good evening. I keep writing myself notes and forgetting to read my notes. I need to make you into it. I need to give you a wrench. Holly Ivans, Diana 2. Cats and Prepping, good evening. Welcome. Good to see you as well. Devil Dog Prepper And Holly Ivans, I think I said, but I'm not sure about I'll say hello, welcome again. And so we've got a total of 13 on here right now, and thank you so much for that. Would appreciate it if you would, if you're new, if you would hit the like and subscribe. That is, if you like it, and then of course subscribe. That always does help us, and it gives us ideas. You can give us ideas on what you want to discuss next as well. So, like I said, we've got the first Monday in July. We'll be talking about first aid. We'll be talking to a combat medic about first aid. Some of the things that she thinks are really important. We'll also be talking about what are some of the things that she thinks that you should have in your first aid kit. So how to build a good first aid kit and a long-term care kit for like a sick room for people. Okay, so let's get into this. 19th century. Are you okay? I heard a yell from the bedroom. Helen takes the dogs into the bedroom when we're doing this. Okay, 1887, we have the Interstate Commerce Act. This early government effort was to regulate business establishments and establishes the Interstate Commerce Commission, allowed the government to regulate railroad rates. So basically, it was trying to get the railroads from entering into an agreement, we will charge a penny a mile per ton or something like that. And along these routes, and we will pay other carriers to carry for you, and there was all kinds of different things going on. And so they wanted to make it so it was more competitive, more fair, and more available to the average consumer. The act also prohibited such practices as pooling, which was the rate agreements, rate discrimination. They had to charge everybody basically the same rates, and charging more for a short haul than for a long haul of goods, because they wanted to get that mileage accumulator for the stuff. Then that was pretty much it. Those two, the Railway Labor Act and the Interstate Commerce Act in the late 1800s. 1906, we had the Pure Food and Drug Act, and then we also had the Meat Inspection Act, both passed in 1906, and both of these were consumer protection acts, trying to ensure that only the best, gosh, I got the hiccups, only ensuring that the best quality stuff was delivered to the consumer on the market. Of course, we were very dependent upon horses up until the 1930s in the military. We still had the cavalry. We had horse-drawn caissons, and artillery. So there were a vast number of horses in the military. So they had every troop, which is equivalent to a company, about 160, 175 soldiers, had an assigned veterinarian. And the veterinarian had two responsibilities. Number one, to take care of the horses for that unit. And number two, to certify the quality of meat that was coming in to feed the soldiers. So, all the meat that the soldiers were eating had to be approved by the vet. Let me see here. So 3 years later, Congress passed dealt with the problems of trusts, and in 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed, prohibiting all restraints of trade, including price fixing, bid rigging, market allocation agreements. So basically, and it's an unofficial agreement because it would be a violation of Sherman Antitrust Act if it were ever found to be a hardy agreement. But there's a smaller food grocery chain here in Texas, and they predominantly dominate the markets where there's smaller communities. And then, of course, in the larger communities, the Texas-based company, that grocery store that does those is HEB, Howard E. Butts. But you never see the two of them in the same location. And, that's kind of suspicious. And so, although there's no written agreement, if they made it into a written agreement, I will not go into any town less than 50,000. You can have that. You don't come in any town over 50,000. So if there was that non-compete type of an agreement, that would be a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Hello, Devil Dog Prepper. Welcome. Listen to Grandma. Welcome. Great to see you as well. Let me see here. Tuck by V, I believe that is. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Let me see who else here. I am so afraid of this mouse. I'm so sorry. Kaylin Strain, good to see you as well. Yeah, on every other Monday, I'm a member of St. Vincent de Paul. And that's where 25% of all my earnings on this channel go to. But we go out and help the needy, the poor, the hungry, the homeless. Tonight we had a young neighbor who had an automobile issue, and we had to have the whole congregation, basically, we call it a conference, vote on whether or not to help her with her major vehicle expense. But yeah, so every other Monday I can't be at Gills because I'm at the church working on St. Vincent de Paul type stuff. Let me see. Double Dog, my overgrown doodle dog is like that too. She's been unwell for a bit. Oh, we love doodle dogs. We have three Chihuahuas, two that are ours, and the third one is my daughter's. But before that, we only had poodles, and so yeah, we are poodle lovers in this household. So doodles are fantastic as well. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, this is an Apple, what do they call it, a MacBook that I use. And so it's kind of strange. Okay, so now the Progressive Era. So the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act, both of 1906, to control banking and regulate business, Congress passed 3 acts, and this is in the early, right, pre-World War I era. The Federal Reserve Act, which created the Federal Reserve System, real good book on the Federal Reserve System, and it's called something from Jekyll Island. But it talks about, and the Federal Reserve Board actually met on Jekyll Island. But I tell you, I am not a fan of the Federal Reserve Board. But anyhow, or the Federal Reserve. And then the Federal Trade Commission was created in 1914 along with the Clayton Act. And both of those, like the Sherman Antitrust Act, were sought to prevent businesses from forming monopolies or trusts. As a matter of fact, it's the Sherman Act that was used to break up Ma Bell. So when I was younger, you had, for example, I grew up under Mountain Bell, which was, the mountain time zone pretty much was Mountain Bell. And then I had a cousin who worked for Illinois Bell up in Chicago. And then you had Pac Bell. And so you had all these different baby bells, okay, and Bell Labs and a lot of different things. And then in the 70s, they used the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up Bell Telephone. The only competitor that they had at that time was another company, GTE, General Telephone Electronics. And so that was the only competition to the Bell Telephone System. So they broke up Bell Telephone System and made each one of those bells into their own. So for example, what was here in Central Texas became Southwestern Bell, but that was a totally different company. Now SWB, Southwestern Bell, has bought back pretty much, I'm going to say at least half of the Bell companies, and so it's under Southwestern Bell rather than AT&T. It used to be that AT&T was the overall conglomerate of those organizations. Okay, so Kaylin says that Northwestern Bell covered Nebraska and Iowa when she was a kid. Yeah, so there were a whole bunch of what they called baby bells. Then you had the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. The 16th Amendment passed in 1913. Now, this is interesting because Congress had tried to establish an income tax and said they were going to increase revenue through taxation of income. And they tried that, and the Supreme Court said, no, that's unconstitutional. You can't do it. So what they had to do is they had to go back and create the 16th Amendment, which allowed them to tax an individual on their income. And then, of course, you have later Supreme Court decisions that say that businesses are entities, are individuals, because without that classification that a business is an individual in a sense, then you couldn't tax on income for businesses. So you had to say yes to part of the individual for income tax purposes. But then there were people who wanted them kicked out of the businesses, and so they came across with a bill. They wanted to exclude businesses and say they are non-entities. And that's the one where President Obama, during one of his speeches, annual addresses, told that the Supreme Court publicly, first time that's ever been done as well, that they made a mistake in not declaring that they are not individuals. Well, the whole thing is if they declared them not to be an individual, then that means that you can't tax them as far as income tax. So quite funny how these things kind of take their things. And I forget what that bill was called. Citizens United was the name of that Supreme Court decision. Okay. So then we get into the Great Depression, and a whole bunch of things happened during the Great Depression. So in 1933, you had the New Deal. So President Roosevelt's New Deal increased the government intervention in a number of economic policy areas, including financial markets, agriculture, labor, and industry. So from 1933 to 1940, there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail. 1964, we had social regulation. The 60s and 70s were basically socially, and we're talking about society social type things, not social government, socialistic, but we're talking about society social issues. And then in 1978, we had the Airline Deregulation Act. So up until 1978, the airlines were regulated. So the government told them how much they could charge for a ticket, how much profit they could make off of each air mile that they flew. Amazingly, at that time, the vast majority of income for airlines was not off passengers, it was off of the mail. And so, so the government still wanted to have a heavy hand in determining how much they were going to pay the airlines to carry mail from one place to another. So airmail was a predominant thing. That kind of went away in the 70s and 80s. I think just through efficiency of other transportation products and vehicles. Then in 2008, and so that's why you didn't really need airline regulation anymore after 1978. But it caused a whole bunch of them to start going bankrupt. So Frontier Airlines. I think the first one to go was Pan American Airlines, Braniff. There were a whole bunch of airlines that ended up going bankrupt, and part of the problem was that a lot of those had received subsidies from the government to fly to smaller municipalities that were receiving air traffic because of the mail. And then once the deregulation went away, then a lot of these smaller communities no longer had regular air service. When I flew back from Germany in 1980, I flew to Dallas. And then at Dallas, I got onto a regional prop flight from Dallas to Killeen Regional Airport, and which served Fort Hood. And the funny thing is, I had stayed an extra 2 weeks in Germany to go skiing, and that airline that flew from Dallas Fort Worth down to Killeen, their baggage hold was shorter than the length of my skis. So I had to pay like $50 to have my skis shipped down by Greyhound bus because they couldn't fit in the airplane. That's how small the airplane was. And we're flying along, and there's like maybe 8 passengers, maybe 10 seats. And all of a sudden, you heard this noise. There was only a curtain separating the pilots from me. And he said that the radar is overheating, turn it off. And we were flying through a cloud bank. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. But, that's air deregulation. Then, of course, in 2008, you had the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, popularly known as the Bailout Bill. This was by President Obama. And so it tried to help a lot of the subprime banks and everything. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this was President Bush. President Obama was later. He had one in 2012. Some of the other New Deal things you had, the Glass-Steagall Act in 1933 required the separation of commercial and investment banking, and it also set up the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So that's the one where if a bank defaults, the federal government basically guarantees your savings in it up to $250,000 of value. I think that we need to constantly review laws. I think every law, this is Lee's personal opinion, so please accept my personal opinion for what it is. And there are those of you who definitely have a different point of view. I personally believe that any bill passed by Congress or passed by any state legislature or passed by any governmental institution needs to have a sunset date. And I think that typically those sunset dates should probably not exceed more than 10 years, which means that that bill automatically expires 10 years from the day it's passed, unless Congress goes in, takes a look at it, and modifies it to meet new existing standards and needs, and then republishes it as a new bill under the same Sunset Act. I don't think we should have any long-standing acts. I think every bill that we pass, any element of government, should not be a bill, should not be a law for longer than 10 consecutive years. And that way, that would force Congress to go back and revisit things and fix things instead of trying to piecemeal them as riders to other bills as they come along. And I think I gave you the example of the BART subsidy by Nancy Pelosi for the Defense Authorization Act. So we can talk about fiscal policy. Fiscal policy in a global context, so where the United States is vis-a-vis the rest of the world. I am a little bit of an isolationist, and I believe that we should be producing and manufacturing and using our own gasoline and fuel products. I don't think that we should be importing a whole bunch from other countries, but we are. We were a petroleum exporter just 3-4 years ago. We were producing enough to where we were using it ourselves and then shipping it out. And now we are a petroleum importer. So we're buying from other countries. Now, there's always a good side and a bad side to any policy that there is. The good news is because we're buying from other countries, we're keeping all of our stuff under the ground. So if we need it, we can pump it at any time we want. Okay, that's the good news. The bad news is that we are sending our dollars overseas to other countries, and we could be using those dollars to support our own people here in the U.S. So, I mean, there's give and take. You've got to determine, and that's the whole thing about economic policy. It's always a give and take. We're going to talk about that when we talk about agricultural subsidies as well. You know, we can pay a farmer not to overproduce food because the whole thing about telling a farmer, we want you, and that's going to be another act we'll talk about here, the Agricultural Act. But we can tell a farmer, we only want you to produce 30 acres of wheat, okay? And those other 12 acres that lay fallow, we're going to pay you as if you had grown those, okay? So now what we're doing is we are keeping a constant supply to the market so that there is no rising and falling based upon the availability of wheat to the market on the consumer price. So we have a fairly stable market price to the market. The disadvantage is that there are those who say, but you're paying American farmers to be non-productive. You're paying them to do nothing. And so as that happens, what happens is you see people looking for more and more reasons to not plant and get money for not planting as if they had. I mean, if I'm getting paid for not doing anything, I will look for better things that are going to give me more money for not doing them as well, right? So that's kind of where that whole argument is. Do we subsidize them? Do we not subsidize them? There was a happy medium that was met back in the 1980s, and basically what they did was they said, okay, produce everything you can, and what we'll do is we're going to ship this overseas to the military, and we're going to distribute it to the military serving overseas through the commissaries. And then that way we don't have to pay them a cost of living adjustment because they're living in a foreign country and paying foreign prices, or we're acquiring the things for the commissaries off the local markets in the foreign countries. And so, that turned out to be a pretty good deal. We were getting lots of commodities in the commissaries. The farmers were getting paid for what they produced and not to not produce something. So it was a pretty good solution. But unfortunately, of course, with international things going on, all of a sudden there was a decrease in the amount of money that the U.S. was spending, let's say in Germany on German wheat. They got upset. So, that was a very short-lived thing. Remember, as I said, for everything that we do, there is an action and a reaction. There's always an upside and a downside. There's always a yin and a yang. It's never a very simple, straightforward solution. It always has a ripple that goes somewhere else. And it just depends on how big that ripple gets when it bounces off a wall and comes back as to how long that policy stays in effect. So let me catch up with the chat here. Muskoka Oma, I hope you're talking about dogs and not about me. I prefer not to be called beautiful. Northwestern Bell became CenturyLink, which has more recently become Lumen. Yeah, they're same thing. They're all being bought out, bought up. It's crazy. Okay. So, so great conversation about dogs. I'm a dog man myself. I love it. Hey, Gil, welcome. Sorry, I was at St. Vincent de Paul meeting this evening, so I wasn't able to catch your live, but I will watch it when we get done here this evening. I want to put out a video on burns and burn first aid kits. So I'll do that right after this. I'll add any notes to this one. Then I'll go back and rewatch yours. However, I have a prayer group that meets at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And so I've got to do that. So I got to be able to wake up and get to that in time. It's in a different town. So I've got to get over there and see them. Let me see. Lots of different things have gotten bailed out. As a matter of fact, the bailouts that President Obama did for the auto industry, if you take a look at it, the bailouts did not really go to the auto industry. It went to the auto unions. And so I filed a lawsuit. I didn't make it past district court, by the way, but I filed a lawsuit because that is in violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1933. So you can't give money to anybody who is a member of the board. And the labor union, at that time, it was Larry Gettelfinger, was the CEO of the UAW, United Auto Workers, and he sat on the board of Ford. And so it was very shady. But Obama gave all that money to the labor unions, not necessarily to the auto workers. I'm sorry, to the auto makers. Okay, so that was kind of when they called it the auto bailout. That was kind of a misnomer. The unions had really misused their money. Their retirement and healthcare funds were really had major problems, and that's what we bailed out. We did not bail out the auto industry as much as we bailed out the auto union. Okay. Eastern Airlines, there's another one that died. Absolutely correct. There was one, and if anybody here has, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget the name of it. Now that I said it, I remembered it and I forgot it. Golly, but it was 707s, and they flew us back and forth from Vietnam. Let me see. Okay, I apologize if I passed up somebody here. Let me get down here. Theophilus, you will not get any disagreement from me on that at all. I am a small government person. I believe very strongly in the First. People that exercise. We do silver sneakers. Exercising for old farts. And I got to show you my T-shirt. I probably had about a dozen women say, "I love your T-shirt." So let me see if you can see it. Can you read it? It says it doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be reread, the U.S. Constitution. And so a lot of people really like that today at exercise. One person didn't, but it's okay. If you ask me my political affiliation, my official voter registration card says constitutionalist. Let me see here. Yeah, Trans World Airlines, absolutely. TWA. But there was another one that gosh, what was it? We called them the Freedom Birds. And it was actually owned by the CIA. Let me see. Delta, yeah. Golly, look at all those. Hello, Food Forest Permaculture. Good evening. Welcome. Glad to see you. So we have to talk about not only does our economic policy affect us internal to the U.S., but as I showed you, even that thing about you were going to pay the farmers to produce, but we're going to give it to the soldiers, that had a foreign impact as well. So there's lots of things that happen. One of the ways that we spend an awful lot of money was we had over 800 military bases and posts and caserns and everything else worldwide. And so we were basically renting the land to have those facilities. We were paying local workers to work in them. We were paying local water, gas, sewage, building maintenance, and everything else to the host country. And so we were shelling out an awful lot of money. In the intelligence service, I was working at Field Station Augsburg, which was a very large signals intelligence collection facility. And we probably had 3,200 soldiers assigned there. So 400, maybe 800 on each trick. We had 4 tricks. You worked 6 days, 2 days off, 6 swings, 2 days off, 6 mid shifts, 2 days off. And so we were on this constant 6 and 2 rotation, which meant that we had 4 different tricks going at any one time. So one was on days, swings, mids, and one was on break. But it took 6 of these big tour buses, Dimmelmeyer tour buses from Augsburg, to take us out to Gablingen Kaserne, where the collection site was, and back to Sheridan Kaserne, where our mess hall and barracks were. So they did that 3 times a day, 3 round trips a day. You got to take the troops out there, then they sit and wait and bring the troops who are getting off shift back to the Kaserne. So Dimmelmeyer, I am quite certain. I mean, you're looking at 18 round trips a day with these luxury tour buses, and so I'm quite certain they became rich off of the U.S. Army. But anyhow, so where does revenue for the government come from? And Mother Earth Garden Club, good evening, welcome. So where it comes from, individual income taxes pay 43.2% of the total revenue for the government. Now, of that, the top 1% income earners pay 40% of the total income tax. Okay. So the rest, the other 60% comes from the rest of us. So the rich already pay 40% of the total income tax. So you figure 40% of 43% is the rich, the top 1% of the country, pay 16% of the total revenue that the government gets. Okay. Then there's Social Security and retirement receipts. So that's what we pay into Social Security. Corporate income taxes are 7.2%. 5.27% is other, and excise taxes are 3.5%. And where it goes, so people, 61.6%, human resources, that's government jobs, the GS people, and military. National defense, 18.8%, physical resources, 12.4%, net interest, 5.3%, and other functions, 4.6%. So let's talk about how a budget gets submitted. And then there are 2 key words we need to discuss as well. So the first Monday in February, Congress receives the president's budget request. February 15th, the CBO reports on the Budget Committee the fiscal policy and budget priorities, including an analysis of the president's budget. On the 25th of February, and this modifies depending upon the calendar, congressional committees submit views and estimates on spending. April 1st, the budget committees report concurrent resolutions on the budget, which sets a total for budget outlays, an estimate for expenditures for major budget categories, and the recommended level of revenues. On April 15th, Congress passes action on concurrent resolution on the budget. May 15th, annual appropriations bills are considered in the House. June 10th, the House Appropriations Committee completes their action. June 15th, Congress completes action on reconciliation legislation. So what happens with reconciliation legislation, the House passes one bill, the Senate passes another, then they're two different bills, okay? So they go to what they call reconciliation. They go to a joint committee meeting, and they can hammer out an entirely third new one. Has nothing to do with the other two that were passed, and that's the one they submit to both houses for approval. That's called a reconciliation bill. The House completes all action on the appropriate bills, and then October 1st, the new fiscal year begins. So let's talk about two key words. One word is a deficit, and the other one is debt, okay? So deficit is basically, I make $1,000 a month, okay? My expenses are $1,200 a month. I have a deficit of $200 a month, okay? So that means I am spending $200 more per month than what I can make and pay. That's the deficit, the difference between what we're bringing in and what we're spending out. Now, if I don't pay for that deficit this year, okay, and I let it right over to next year, I'm taking a loan out to pay for that deficit, okay? So I ended the year and I'm down $1,000. I've got to take out $1,000 loan or these guys are going to repossess my house, okay? So I take out $1,000 loan so that now I am deficit neutral. I don't have a deficit, okay? I paid that off with the assets from the loan, but now that loan becomes debt, okay? So that's the difference between deficit and debt. Deficit is short term. It's a difference between what we're bringing in and what we're spending. You don't want to see a deficit. And then debt is we had to take out a loan to pay for it, and so now we have to pay back that loan. So the debt for the U.S. right now is in the 30 trillions, I believe. Let me check here. You can go to usdebtclock.org, and US debt clock, if I can spell clock.org. So as it stands right now, the U.S. debt is 34,792,325,000,000, and then I can't keep up with the spinner, 800, 900,000. Yeah, so basically we're spending like $1 million a second. So that's our debt. That's our total debt. Unbelievable. If you go to that site, usdebtclock.org, it also tells you how much of the debt you are personally responsible for, because they take that total debt that's owed and divide it up by the number of working citizens in the U.S., and that tells you what the debt per person is. Okay. Then we have the financial policy, monetary policy. And how strong do we want the dollar, reserve components, and things like that? So there's this guy by the name of John Maynard Keynes. He became very popular, especially with the Democrat Party. And John Maynard Keynes came up with what he calls Keynesian economics. So, and this was really very popular during the Great Depression in the 1930s up until the beginning of World War II. And the thought process was, we need to create debt for the government, and they did that through bonds. And then through that debt, then they have cash, and that cash gets injected into society. And so then you have the same thing as where that person spends the money, and then it goes through several different cycles. And so that money probably sees 100 cycles before it gets back to where it's paid off the loan. Okay, so that was Keynesian philosophy, was that we needed that money to be injected into our economy by the government. What we didn't realize at the time was when you inject an excess of created dollars through the Federal Reserve, through the government, and inject that into society, too many dollars purchasing the same quantity of goods causes what's called inflation. So I have all these dollars and I need to spend them on something. I can't just save them, because under Keynesian economics, you have to have that constant flow of cash throughout the society. So because I have to constantly spend that money on the same goods, the cost of the goods go up, so that there's that constant flow of that same amount of money going through the government and going through the economy. Of course, the other side of that is trickle-down economics. It's basically the same philosophy, same circle. Only what we're doing is we're counting on corporations to inject the money into our society through the production of viable services and products. Okay, so the theory is, if I create a new schmanangle, okay, and everybody's really happy with the schmanangle, and everybody has to have one. Now I inject that into the economy. Now everybody's spending their money on schmanangles, right? Well, in order to make that schmanangle, I have to hire more people. I have to have a trucking company do my distribution for me. I have to have raw products coming in. So I have to purchase those from a provider. So that's the difference, is you've got trickle-down economics, which is basically depending upon corporations to do the injection of products and services, not cash, products and services. So when you're injecting products and services and the cash flow remains the same, there is no inflation. However, when the government injects extra cash into the economy, that's what causes inflation. So let me see. Theoxerus is saying, the problem with Keynesian thinking is called entropy, where there's always a loss to support friction. The machine, yeah, there's always unaccounted for dollars that just fall off the conveyor belt, and that's also called corruption. But you're going to have corrupt, and you're going to see my bias here. You're going to have corruption, whether it's Keynesian or whether it's trickle down. There's always going to be corruption in the system. There's always going to be those who are willing to take a chance at something. I mean, you've got the Bernie Madoff, and you've got the other people who are there, who are willing to make a dollar at your expense. And I can't tell you. I just have a preference towards trickle down, because it does not inject money into the society that causes inflation. I prefer to see a stable cost factor. If we can keep inflation under 1%, I'm a very happy person. If we can keep unemployment under 5%, I'm a very happy person. So, and I'm not an economics guy, okay? My bachelor's is Russian. My MBA is production operations management, so I can, that's on the most effective flow of materials through a factory. And then my master's in public administration is human resources management. So, taking care of the people. Well, what happened was I ended up taking care of people in factories. So I used my MPA to do my love of what I really like, which is factories, my MBA work. And so I was able to work both masters in time, in a sense. So, but I'm more of a trickle down type of a guy. Okay, so the foundations of income security policy. So of course we had the Civil Works Administration was passed in 1933, and that was part of the Great Depression Act of 1932, where President Roosevelt was trying to get people to work. And so he figured, under Keynesian economics, if he could trickle down, if he could create more dollars and then use those dollars to pay people to do public works, that's going to do basically the same thing as the trickle down. We're providing works and services And that's going to not have as much of an inflationary challenge. The problem is where the money comes from. And so it's still being generated at the federal level and injected into society instead of saying there's a stable M2 money supply. And we're going to use that and create jobs and services with the existing supply instead of injecting more into it. That's a very rudimentary explanation. I'm very sorry, but I am not an economist. I have to confess that. So I'm trying to explain it at my level of understanding. Some of the other things that have come up here recently: ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Stability Act, and then you've got Social Security Act under President Roosevelt. So we've got all these different things. Then you've also got the national. So in the 1930s, you had the national. You had the WPA. You had the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act. We'll talk about that. That's the Wagner Act, and it's still the current union for everybody except those that are covered by the Railway Labor Act, the RLA, which is the airport, the air transport and train transport. So, and then you had the Fair Labor Standards Act, was also passed in the 1930s. So the purpose of the Fair Labor Standards Act, let's get this straight. The purpose of the Fair Labor Standards Act was not to take care of you, the individual. The purpose of the Fair Labor Standards Act was to gain more employment. So prior to the Fair Labor Standards Act, if I had an employee and I worked them 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, I didn't have to pay any bonuses, okay? I didn't have to do anything. I mean, you worked for me 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. 72-hour-a-week work week was very common. I could have children working in the factories. And so what the Fair Labor Standards Act did was it says, no, you're going to pay a penalty. We've got all these excess people out here unemployed. We want them in the factories. So if you've got if you're typically working people 72 hours a week, we're going to kind of divide that in half. We're going to call it a 40-hour work week. So if you work anybody more than 40 hours a work week, you're going to pay time and a half for every hour over. So what that does is I say, hey, I'm a smart guy. I only want to pay that employee 40 hours. I don't want to pay them, 41 and a half hours for 41 hours work. So I'm going to take that job and divide it in half. I'm going to have this guy work 40 hours a week. I'm going to have this guy work 40 hours a week. That way I don't have to pay any penalties. That was the true reason why the the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, was created. The secondary reason it was created was to establish a minimum wage. At that time, it was 75 cents an hour. And the third reason was to keep children out of factories and other things. So the three provisions: the 40-hour work week, the minimum wage, and then the third part was the child labor laws. Now, there were a lot of people who were exempted from the Fair Labor Standards Act. So people who worked in the fields, picking migrant farmers, for example, are exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Anybody who works in a legislative organization, and there are a couple others, but there were almost as many people exempted from it as there were who had to be subject to it. Social Security was never intended to be a retirement program, although it has turned into that. It was also supposed to be a temporary program. But we have kind of turned that into a lifelong thing. And to be honest with you, I like my Social Security. Then as we got towards the 60s and 70s, we had a lot of other things that were happening. We became very concerned about the impact. I'll give you an example. 1971, I had finished basic training, went home, got my 1964 Dodge Dart, and I was driving from El Paso, Texas, to the Defense Language Institute, Presidio, Monterey, California. So I just took Interstate 10. We lived about a mile off of Interstate 10 in El Paso. I took Interstate 10 all the way until it intersected with Highway 101, and then took that up the Ventura Highway until I got to Highway 1, the California Coast Highway. And the California Coast Highway, Highway 1, goes all the way up to Monterey, and it was right there almost. I mean, it's within a mile of the language school. So that's how I went to the language school. As I was coming over the hill, the LA basin, it was getting late. It was about 11 o'clock at night. And I was on CB radio and I talking to a guy and said, man, I tell you, this coastal fog is just unbelievable. I had heard about it, about the fog that they had on the West Coast and the East Coast. He says, and this trucker came back and said, buddy, that's not fog, that's smog. This is prior to the EPA. And so, yeah, I mean, it was so bad. The smog in LA was so bad at 9, 10 o'clock at night that I could not see the taillights of the semi in front of me unless I was like 15, 20 feet behind them. It was dangerous. So, the EPA had a purpose to try to reduce the amount of that. We had the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. We've had several different acts. I think some of them have gone overboard, which is, once again, why I'm totally in support of a sunset clause for any one of these acts. Is it serving the purpose we need? Same thing with right now. We want to go towards EVs. And as we move more and more towards EVs, we're finding out that the amount of money and the amount of pollution that's being invested into getting the component parts for the solar generators out of the earth is exceeding the savings that we're getting by having them. There was one just yesterday. There is a community in California that's tearing down a 100-year-old thick growth forest, which produces oxygen, which I think is pretty important to us, in order to put up solar panels so that they can have charging stations for their EVs. So remember, I told you there's always a trade-off. You're going to have this, but it's going to cost you this. So you always have to have that weight of which one do we value more. And the bad thing is, as we progress as human beings, we value different things at different levels at different times. And that's where we are, is right now we're valuing EV above oxygen. Okay. Clean Air Act is passé. That was 1973. So that's kind of where we are. So that's basically it in a nutshell as far as financial, fiscal policy and economic policy. Next week, we'll begin our last chapter in this book, which is going to be the international policy. And that's going to be kind of exciting because we'll see whether or not we are in a major conflagration around the world. France has said that they are sending in troops. Germany has authorized the use of Patriot anti-air defense missiles and the use of HIMARS and other equipment to strike targets across the border into Russia. Not Medvedev. Who was it? It was, I forget who it was, but somebody there in the cabinet, in the Russian cabinet, said that the Poles had better watch out because if they mess around too much, within a couple of years, there won't be anybody speaking Polish on the face of the earth. I mean, this is getting downright nasty. So we'll see how our domestic policy goes here in the very near future. Crazy. So let's take a look here. Social Security got split into supplemental security income for the disabled people, including children. Then later, Social Security disability income for those who worked and became disabled before retirement. Yes. And so there's also the state equivalent to Social Security. And then you also have Medicare. And then you also have Medicaid, which is a state. It's mandated that states pay it, but there's no funding coming from the federal government in a lot of cases. So, I mean, it's crazy. We need a revamp of our spending. We need a revamp of our fiscal policies, our financial policies, our economic policies. We need to reset the dollar. The dollar is losing value on a. Let me see, let me go to gold, silver, Mike Maloney's channel here, goldsilver.com. See where we are as far as the price of gold and silver today. Gold went down to 2347.20. Silver, it went down to 30.63. The vast majority of my silver I bought between 12 and 14. So I'm happy with it being at 30 now that I'm not buying it, but we shall see what happens there as well. I remember when things started to improve in the environment. It's a lot better now than 50 years ago. Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. The example I gave is basically 1971, April of 1971. So that's 53 years ago when I went to basic Indonesian language in Monterey. Um, so yeah. Russia's mostly bluff. They can't control the air or the sea and can't advance on the ground. It's an empire burning itself down. I think we are all burning ourselves down. I have a feeling we are looking at the Great Reset. I think, my personal opinion, we should be allied with Russia. That our biggest threat is China. And man, if China just stops producing products and saying, you know what, we're not shipping to the U.S. anymore, it's amazing. But simple things like D5W, normal saline, Ringer's lactate, no longer made in the U.S. We are totally dependent upon China. We found out we didn't make any N95 masks or even surgical masks here in the U.S. They were all made in China. We found that out in 2020, that we couldn't get that. We couldn't even get hand sanitizer because it was all come from overseas. I think if China put a tariff or an embargo on products that we consume that they manufacture, they could shut us down in a day. And it would be something else. So Kaylin's also a long time ago buyer. Well, here's the thing. So you're thinking in terms of monetary. I just had this discussion with a guy on Facebook today. You are looking at it as money, okay? Whereas it's actually a protection against the devaluation of the dollar. So as the dollar goes down in value, the precious metals remain constant, okay? So if you say, well, the dollar is really not going down in value, we're going to say it's a constant dollar, then that means that really what happens is the value of gold and silver goes up. So everything is done in dollars. You don't trade in silver, gold, and platinum. Internationally, even barrels of oil are done in dollars, although BRICS is trying to change that. So in order to buy something with gold or silver, you sell your gold or silver at the market rate. So to answer your question, what is it that I could have got 5 years ago at $15 an ounce that this year I'm going to get at $30 an ounce? I don't know. Whatever I sell it in order to buy. I will tell you, I made a major purchase about a year ago and used silver because it was a personal transaction between two people. I showed him where it was. I even gave him a little bit of a profit. I gave him 13 ounces of silver, and he wanted $300 for the item. And I actually gave him $320 worth of silver at the time. And so now that same $320 worth of silver is probably worth $600. And he thinks that he got messed over. And so, you can't please people. I think part of the problem is we try to think of gold and silver as being a commodity. You're going to go to the bank and say, I want to pay a bill with this. You can't. You can't take rice to the bank and say, I want to pay a bill with this, okay? You have to exchange it on an exchange for its fair market value into dollars and then use those dollars to buy whatever it is that you want. Same thing with potatoes, rice, oil, anything else. You've got to change it into dollars. Dollars is the currency that we use here in the U.S. China and Russia have problems on the Ussuri River. For a long time. There's one little particular island in the river, and it's basically a border between China and Russia, and they constantly fight over that border and constantly fight over that island. It is something else. And we also make, we do now, and that's for sure. And because I think there are plenty of smart people who are saying we can't be caught like this again. The Abbott Labs factory I used to pass it when I worked at Dell down in Austin at Metric 12. The Abbott Labs normal saline plant is in Austin on Burnett Road, and it's closed down. It's mothballs right now. So we are dependent upon a lot of other countries. We've outsourced all our jobs and products, including many. Yes, you're absolutely right. About 70% of our medications come from India, and about 30% come from, and these are rough, very rough numbers. Okay, about 30% come from China. The other 10% come from European and U.S. producers. There are some European producers still producing it. And that's basically because of inflation. You're absolutely right. So when I was working in the HR industry, I kept a sign behind my desk, and people would tell me that they needed, and McDonald's, by the way, is thinking very seriously considering coming out of California because of their $20 an hour minimum wage for fast food workers. They're thinking about shutting down all the McDonald's in California. But I had what I called the Big Mac factor, and it was a poster behind my desk. And so when I took a look at the minimum wage, the amount of time that it took at the price of a Big Mac at that time, and then the amount of time you had to work in order to pay for a Big Mac at that minimum wage. And and I kept a chart of how that was. I called it the Big Mac factor. So what people don't understand is I get a pay raise. Okay. So like they did in California, they're going to pay their fast food workers $20 an hour, but they don't want you to raise the price of the product. Well, where does that money come from? Well, their whole thing is to punish the owner. They don't want owners to make money. They want that money to be, paid by the consumer to the employee. Well, number one, fast food jobs were never intended to be a lifetime career. It was ideal for entry-level workers, for students, and for other people as part-time jobs, but it was not intended to be a full-time career job. So now I've got. Let's say that I was making as an owner. I'll give you a good example. I'll give you a real life example. I was paying myself when I owned my store $200 a week as income. So when I did my deposit to the bank, I kept out $200, and that's what I paid myself. My employees made more money than I did. Okay. The new owner hired a manager. So now you figure if I'm paying myself, and when I cashed out, I probably had about $15,000, $17,000 in the bank as far as profits. So that last year, I'm going to add that to it. So $200 a week times 52 weeks, I'm making around $12,000 a year. Okay, plus $17,000, $18,000 profit. So I made maybe $30,000 owning that store that last year that I owned it. So the new owner decides she's going to hire her boyfriend, and hired her boyfriend to be the store manager at $70,000 a year. So you've got this increase in wage, right? Where does it come from? You got to increase the prices in order to pay for their wage. Well, then you have this thing in economics called the ISLM curve, okay? Or the how much you charge for a product, the higher the price goes, the less people are going to buy it. And so you want to get it where it's intersecting, where you have the optimum. People are willing to pay this much price, and that's where I'm going to get the maximum number of customers to pay that price. So if you increase the price to offset that increase in salary, then you lose customers and you don't have as much income and you get further in debt. So that's the problem we're having right now is basically we're asking for too much money for what we are producing in comparison to what the actual value of the job is. And then that's also causing inflation for the cost of the products. And then it's a vicious circle that keeps going around and around. Okay, we are over an hour. So that's in relation to ex-MICOG prepper's brother. I buy my diabetic meds from Mexico. Those meds come from England, both those here and those in Mexico, but they are twice as expensive here. Yes, and we have made an attempt. There has been an attempt to put caps on the price of insulin. Believe me, in this household, excuse me, the hiccups are back. In this household, we know the cost of insulin, and so in an attempt to curb the price of insulin. One thing I have to say good about Walmart is Walmart has the old injector, the old, what do you call it? Just straight syringe. Gosh, I'm losing my train of thought. Insulin, and they have both the short term and the long term. For example, right now we have an insulin pump. So, and it has the fancy little thing that it takes a reading of your blood sugar, sends that to the computer, and then the computer tells your pump how much insulin to inject. So everything is automated. But that insulin, Novolog, is very expensive. And as a matter of fact, there's a shortage of Novolog worldwide right now. So we had to go to the endocrinologist and have the endocrinologist change that prescription from Novolog to Humalog, because Humalog is in abundance and it's pretty close to the same thing, whereas Novolog is in shortage. And so we are seeing some medication shortages right now up here as well. So yeah, and I think both of the Novolog is made in Denmark, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe Humalog, I'm not going to guess. I knew, but I don't want to guess. I'll get myself in trouble if I try to give you a country. But it's not made here in the U.S. Thank you, Stray Kitten. Part of my problem is I need to get more liquid into me. Okay, so that's where we are. Tomorrow night, we're going to be on Chapter 3, which is basically the survival retreat in this book, The Survival, How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It, by James Wesley Rawles. I got this in today from Amazon. So this is the book we'll be doing for, let me see if I can get it. There we go. The Collapse. This is the book we'll be doing for the fiction book for the end of the month. And that came in the mail today. So very happy with that. So I think that's where we are. Numbers chapter 6, verses 24, 25, 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and grant you peace. So thank you all so much for being here. I really, 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 really appreciate you. I invited a guy I was having a discussion with on Facebook today. I said, hey, what you need to do, I'm not going to have this discussion with you anymore. If your answer to everything is either hyperbolic or a trite expression, then no, we aren't going to talk prepping because I can't combat fixed beliefs that have no value. Okay. So I said, however, I have a bunch of really smart people who show up on my Tuesday night prepper discussions on Tuesday nights. So please join us Tuesday night at 8:00. So hopefully you guys will be able to convince this guy that he's full of hyperbole and full of trite expressions. In the meantime, thank you for being kind, polite, and respectful to each other, because remember, we're all in this together, so we can come out the other side together. Continue to be kind, polite, and respectful to other people, because you do such a good job here with us. And remember that the way we're going to get through this is together. See you on the other side. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. See you tomorrow night at 8:00. Gil, I will be at your place at 7. Take care. Bye-bye.